Hey, everybody. As you probably noticed, well, first of all, let us know if you can see and hear us because we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants here today. Well, the hearts are a good sign. I don't think I need to introduce my guest again. Well, now watch this. Ilya Ponomarev. Wow.
Wow. Wow.
The last time I saw you, I needed help.
Yes.
This time I just had to think about it before I let it come out of my mouth. And I think I named it. They're pretty close. Closer than
The
before.
world will learn how to race.
Yes. When the word president is in front of your last name. If we could figure out Buttigieg, we can certainly figure out Ponomarev. At least here in the US. So we're in the lobby of the National Press building. When we're done here, we're going to go upstairs to why is my head bigger than yours? Oh, that's better. We're going to go up to the 13th floor to the National Press Club, where there will be a press conference. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's a little bit of a switch of a day here. We normally talk to Ilya on Thursday, but we knew we were going to be together, and I thought that was a wasted opportunity not to have us be together. We won't be together tomorrow. There will be an 11 o'clock show tomorrow, 11 Eastern, with Thomas, so we just switched the dates. But Ilya, why are we here? I mean, to be honest, I'm here. I'm not even sure why we're here. So maybe you know, and you can explain it to the rest of us. And by the way, there's a link we're going to send out, if not during the show, right after the show.
Yeah.
So you can actually watch the press conference. I wish we had the link now, but
We have a link now. It's, I believe it's on my Facebook page.
okay.
Yeah.
So it's
Anyway, we will send the link. It's on, it's broadcast on YouTube.
live.
Yeah. What we are planning to do.
Actually, let me interrupt for 1 second. Lucas, if you're here, could you go to Ilya's Facebook page, get the link, and send it to us? Or maybe you have it on your phone and we can just show it on the screen. Anyway, the press conference begins at noon. Obviously, the show here ends at 11:30. So Kay is looking at it here.
Yes, I will send it.
Okay, great. So why are we here? What are we doing today?
We are preparing a presentation of the book, because that's my visit to the United States. I'm here for just a little bit less than 1 week for different political meetings in Washington, D.C. And I wanted to present the local audience with the book because now, after we made all the announcements about NRA, about Legion of Free Russia, about all the recent developments with the resistance in Russia, everybody is asking me, and what's about your program? What's about your vision for the future? Where are you going to go to? And the book is the answer.
Yes.
So I thought it would be, my original idea would be to present the book when it would be ultimately released. But because everybody is asking this question, I decided to combine the two and make the presentation of the book along with the presentation of the program of all these resistance movements.
Yes.
And that's what we are inviting the local media for.
Yeah, of course, when you're in Washington, D.C., the local media is not really just the local media. It's actually it's the national and the global media. So, one of the questions I asked you last night is, and it would be great for people to hear you talk about this today, is you obviously did a ton of press conferences when you were a deputy as a member of the State Duma. Is this a first for you in terms of doing a press conference as an individual?
Probably not. Probably not, because it's kind of hard to separate one from another. It's it's easy to separate when you are alone at the press conference, whether you are in a group of people at the press conference. That's kind of different. But when you are alone, it doesn't really matter in which capacity you are.
Gotcha.
Because people are coming for some reason to talk to you. That's mysterious, obviously. But they're coming to talk to you and to hear your own thoughts and what is the hats that you are carrying, that you're wearing at the moment. It's not so relevant.
So a lot has happened, obviously, in Ukraine with Russia in the last few days, starting over the weekend and then continuing this week. Do you want to talk about that and sort of your view of it as a Russian who now lives in Ukraine?
It's very easy, not very accurate. I always a little bit skeptical about this approach in general, but sometimes it's easier to understand things with historical parallels. And what happened in Ukraine in March during the retreat of Putin's military away from
Keep talking. The camera's
from
still right.
yes from Kiev. That was kind of the war under Moscow in 1941, when the Hitler army was defeated for the first time. But it was very much clear that it's not the end of the war; that it's just the beginning. That,
Yes.
But it just showed that the Hitler's army was not invincible. What happened now? It reminds very much Stalingrad. Again, that's not the end of the war, but it looked like a turning point, because before that, Hitler's army was advancing, and Putin's army also, it was not very rapidly, but grabbing little bit pieces here and there and whatever. And now it's a major kickback, and they are thrown outside the country, all of the Kharkiv region. And just again, for you to feel the importance of the fight, the relatively small town of Izum, 100,000 people, something like this. I don't know exact number, but it's in that range. Russian army was capturing for more than a month. And there were very dense and intense fights to capture that city. They now were kicked out of it in less than a day. So that's the might.
Took them a month to take it.
Yeah.
Took them a day to lose it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. But one of the questions I think people in the West might have, or their perception is, and you address this in a way, but I want you to drill into it deeper. I think it's easy to look at the news. The Ukrainians themselves are full of glee about what's happening. There's a lot of optimism.
Mhm.
Others in Europe and in the US and everything. And I think if you're in the West and you live in a country that has not experienced this kind of aggressiveness and a war, you might think, oh, this is the beginning of the end. But I think what you're really saying is don't assume that this is now going to end in a week or two because there's good news today. There's a lot more fighting to come.
Yeah, obviously the biggest problem is that Putin has nowhere to go to. He cannot surrender. He cannot put this process on hold. He has no good options.
Yeah.
He is in a total Zugzwang type situation, and that's a big problem because he has to continue fighting. Otherwise, he loses his power, he loses his life most likely. In best case scenario, he just go to the fake. So he has to continue fighting. So there would be a lot of deaths in front of us, a lot of blood, a lot of miseries. But now we are advancing, and that's important.
A couple of questions for you. Is it your perception that the Russian people are beginning to see this invasion or special operation differently as a result of what's been happening over the last few days or week, or are they even aware of what's happening?
Well, I think that again, Russians in general, they kind of pretend that they don't want to hear nothing about this, and that's general perception that they wanted to stay away from it. Now it's even more so. They just, they don't want to be associated with this war. It's like Putin's initiative and whatever. But firstly, the so-called patriotic community, which is really pissed off with everything that's going on. They blame Putin. They blame his generals for inability to fight. Obviously, they criticize him for not being Putin enough, for not being aggressive enough, for not being violent enough. But they are shocked. They see they are losing. There was one phrase that was said by one of the ideologists of Russian, this imperialist nationalist, Yegor Kholmogorov, who said, the worst consequence of what happened in Kharkiv was that before that we assumed that we are better people than Ukrainians, and now we see that we are equal. And
Equal.
equal.
Wow. Okay.
And that's the revelation, which is kind of coming on them.
Yes.
And they would start disseminating this information, obviously. And Putin himself has done so much to promote these people, to make them likable by the general public. So now people do listen to them.
You're talking about, for instance, I turn on the news, and if you have been watching on social media, you'll see a Russian newscast, and there's 3 or 4 or 6 talking heads, and there's a host. You're talking about Putin has built up the reputation of these people, and now these people, the talking heads, are turning against him.
Yes, exactly. So there is a very significant media pressure that will be coming from them. They would disseminate the information about the losses and about the problems. Obviously, they would be saying, that we need to fix it by reinforcing the army.
Yes.
And making mass mobilization to draft more people. But if before theoretically you could persuade yourself, so people who were willing to go to war was like 1% of the population.
Yes.
But nevertheless, even like theoretically, to persuade people to join the army, which is weak, it's kind of easier.
That's more fun.
There's
No fun to wait.
join the army which is dying. And also, the last thing to say is that all of Ukrainian officials know that Ukraine currently has a huge problem with POWs. Well, Ukrainian army captured a lot of POWs from the retreating Russian army.
Right.
Primarily, not from the Russian army, but from the army of so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People Republics, these proxy units that were controlled by the main Russian army. And such a huge number of captives means that they just surrender. They don't want to fight. There is even such a absolutely. It's a figure that circulates in the network that it's 10,000 POWs. I don't believe it. I think it cannot be true. But Ukrainians, they usually do not exaggerate. But so it's an unofficial figure. But anyway, what everybody was telling me, like firsthand from Ukrainian military, that indeed there are a lot of POWs, and that means the morale in the army is extremely low, and people just want to surrender in Russian army.
Very high in Ukraine.
Very high in Ukraine, but now it's even less probability that whatever like peace negotiations may start, because what's the reason for the negotiations?
Right. So it's more like a bunch of picture bugs. So a couple of questions about this. One is, when you have POWs like that, is that an opportunity in this situation? We've talked about this in a way before, but is that an opportunity in this situation to treat the POWs well and begin to have them see that, well, over here in Ukraine, we're good people. We have a good life. We have a good quality of life. And that's related to one of the things I've seen, where Ukrainians, when they're abandoning their weapons and running for home, they're taking washing machines and electronics and cars and bicycles, things they can't get in Russia. So I would imagine in Russia, this begins to have an impact about, oh, wait a minute, they have the good life. I want the good life. What do the Ukrainians know that we don't, or what do they have that we don't have here in Russia?
On the second thing you're saying, psychology works in a different way.
Okay.
Yes, indeed, you are absolutely right. That was happening. With Russian military were pillaging Ukrainian towns and just individual apartments and whatever. But that's because Russian army was drafted from the very bottom of the society, very poor rural areas, because obviously in Russian cities, more or less, quality of life is the same as in Ukraine. So, but the class hatred definitely was there, because people who were coming as part of Russian military were generally poor. And yes, their personal quality of life is usually lower. But the emotions that such people are usually getting is the feeling of jealousy. And even hatred, like, why you live so good, and I live so bad, I will destroy your life. It's not persuasion that my life should be better. It's persuasion that your life should get worse. But unfortunately, that's how it works. But in general, obviously, for Russian military, the revelation that Ukraine is a nice country, it's coming, and we saw a lot of witnesses like talking about this, that they heard such discussions among themselves, that they kind of surprised that the propaganda was saying the other way around, that Ukraine is very poor because it's the West, and that the country is robbed by international advisors, this and that, and with the Russians, we need to liberate them because they are oppressed by the United States, and by British, by whatever, so we're liberated. And obviously, it's kind of different in reality.
So in a situation where, as you said, it's hard to recruit people for the army when you're losing, more and more people in Russia know what's happening now. Is there also, on the flip side, are the partisan groups seeing that more Russians want to be part of their movement and what they're doing?
Well, I wouldn't say that I am getting serious change in number of letters that we receive from Russia, about people who want to join. I would say that the biggest factors are rather the events inside Russia. So obviously a big influx was after the attack on Putin's family. It was the largest surge in the requests. But still, it's significantly higher now than it was before. And I think that after the next thing would happen, obviously, it would be once again, it would surge once again. But no, in general, when people see what's happening in Kharkiv, that inspires a lot of hopes.
Yeah.
That most likely the situation would change. And now I see more and more people talking on social networks that you see there would be military victory of Ukraine. And if there would be a military victory of Ukraine, that means that the Ukraine would determine the future of Russia. And then now we need to work.
These are Russians who are having.
Yeah, Russians are saying, yes, that's we need to talk to Ukraine to actually, participate in this process. Otherwise, it would be decided without us, as it sounds.
Yeah. That's a pretty big stretch from we just want our land back and you to leave and reparations. So that's that's a pretty dramatic turn. Along these lines, and of course, drawing on what you're going to talk about today in the press conference, are there other things related to what's happening in Russia or Ukraine or with the partisan groups that you want to share with us today?
No, probably the most interesting thing is that right now what we saw, and there was our groups were taking part in this, in the Kharkiv offense. Several of people who are within my circle, were there. Actually, it's a rare case of leftists which are fighting on the Ukrainian side. We even lost 2 comrades during this fight, unfortunately, but nevertheless, they're heroes. When they were coming to Russian border, they said it's totally unprotected.
I saw reports of that.
We can go in. Obviously, Ukraine doesn't want this. And everybody has fears that it will provoke Russia and whatever, but nevertheless, Ukraine just psychologically, they don't want to be the conquerors, they want to be the liberators, they want to liberate their own land. But for our troops, there is a way in.
How surprising was it to those soldiers that got to the border and found it basically unmanned? Did they have some heads up about that, or do you think they were just? Do you think a lot of this has just been a surprise about the desertions, the laying down arms, things like that?
Right, look, how Russian army ran and how fast it's ran.
Yes,
was a surprise for them. Nobody was prepared for it.
Yeah,
nobody was prepared for this at all. And now there are a lot of jokes in Ukrainian social networks, a lot of internet memes about that Russians were kicked out of Olympic Games, and now we understand why.
Or I saw a meme of Putin and Zelensky. Zelensky says, I need ammunition, not a ride. Putin says, I need a ride, not ammunition. So over the weekend, one of our regular viewers, and I don't think she's here. I'm trying to watch this. It's a lot harder on a phone than it is a computer screen. But one of our regular viewers asked me a question to ask you. I just killed a mosquito. So if I have this right, I think she was speculating that perhaps Putin is gone or on his way out, and that by whoever the powers may be replacing him, I'm not saying killing him, just replacing him, that,
Why aren't you saying it?
well, because that's fine too. I mean, I'm not discounting, but I mean, gone by whatever means, right? I mean, the title of the book is, does Putin have to die? It's not an assertion, it's a question. That's my and of course we talk about that at length in the book.
Right.
But her point was, she was wondering if the process of moving him out is already in place, and that by replacing him with Putin 2.0 or whatever, it enables that new person to actually begin to pull out of Ukraine because he wasn't the one that went in, and also buys that new leader time in the world community, because you have to just go, oh, well, maybe he's different. Maybe he's going to be better. Maybe we can work with him. Have you heard theories like that? And do you have anything to say about the theory itself?
No, obviously there is such theory. And in this theory, if we assume that, for example, somebody like Sergei Kiriyenko, who is deputy chief of presidential staff and most likely candidate, the most influential clan in the Russian power of Yuri Kovalchuk, to be such a successor for Putin, if Kiriyenko comes, yes, he would be, playing a liberal flute to the West, transition inside the country, compromises, retreats, rearrangements, shuffles, can keep Crimea still, let's negotiate, here and there. And the West would be very much tempted,
Foolishly tempted,
especially Europeans. So it's a nicer guy,
Give us some media.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, and that's his godfather was Boris Nemtsov, okay, so it's like we can talk to him. The one minor question is how he can get to power, because for such person to get to power, it needs to be a managed transition.
Yes.
And right now, I don't see any feasible path to a managed transition, because Putin cannot leave without winning the war.
Yes.
And whoever.
Well, unless he leaves on a slab.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But again, then it would also not be his choice, right?
That's right.
And with all others, if there would be this kind of violence, then why would they select a candidate which is next to Putin? They would start fighting with each other, their own influence. Why would they let themselves fall under such a guy? I do not understand that. That's why I think that in general, this scenario of a gradual transition is not so likely. I think it's very likely that somebody may try this scenario, but I think it's very unlikely that such scenario may actually work and would be sustained.
So a couple other things I want to ask you. One is, when you go from Kyiv to the West, whether it's here at DC or going to London, what is the first thing people ask you since the invasion, or even in this last trip? What is the first thing that people ask you about what's happening, or what do you think is going to happen?
Oh yeah, usually the first thing that they're asking is what's the situation in the front line, and how is life in Kyiv and in other places that I visit. I will ask questions about relatives, families, friends, and whatever we know together. It's not that common to be asked about what are the future plans. And that's very unfortunate. And even here in this city, that's what I'm trying to talk to many influential guys that I am meeting. I am telling them, okay, you now totally focused how to help Ukraine to fight without provoking a retaliation from Russia on your own soil.
Right.
That's understandable. Somebody's putting more emphasis on how to help Ukraine. Somebody puts more emphasis on how to prevent retaliation.
Yes.
But nevertheless, that's very tactical. Both things are very
Yes.
tactical. But the strategical thing, what would be the next day after we claim victory? And that's the most important thing, because would Russia stay as one country? What is the most desirable outcome? Okay, so we shouldn't make guesses, but at least, we should say, what we would like to see and try to create this situation. For example, I honestly do not know what America would like to see. I don't think that America knows what it would like to see. America, I think, just wants to have no problem in the future. But
It's like a parent that says, go to your room and be quiet. As long as you're quiet, I'm not going to worry about what you're doing.
yeah, exactly. But you know how to achieve this.
Yes.
And even the most fundamental questions that I am asking about. So what's about the nuclear weapons?
Yes.
It's not that I would follow what you're asking me to do, but I at least want to understand what you want.
Right. What is your view?
Yeah, what's your view on this? Do you want Russia to be denuclearized? Or you want Russia, vice versa, to keep nuclear weapons to contain China? What many people are saying. Or do you want Russia to stay as one country, which is safer theoretically, or you want Russia to be fragmented, that it's no longer a single empire? But again, then it's coming to the question of nukes.
Yeah.
Then what would happen with United Nations?
Right.
Etc. And literally nobody's thinking about this. Literally nobody. And that's a big problem because firstly, it helps Putin propaganda a lot, because when you don't have a position, they can create whatever position for you they want and say that's their position.
Yes.
And then you have to be not proactive but reactive, either debating with the position or agreeing with the position. It's not your position, it's Putin's position, which is instilled. But at the same time, it would be nice to understand whether we are allies or whether we are not allies.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. One of the lines in your book, and we'll talk about that more next week. And I can't quote it exactly, but I've reread it probably 100 times. And the gist of it basically is, even if Putin is gone tomorrow, the problems that we're experiencing today don't go away. They may get worse. And I hadn't even thought about it until just now, but the book, not yet. The book itself is the plan that we're talking about here. And I'm just realizing as you're talking, you're expanding my view of who the audience for that is. I always was thinking of it as for the West, but it's just as much for the East, because there needs to be an alignment of this plan. And, that's going to take some great diplomacy.
I agree. For many leaders, authoritarian leaders, they think that being unpredictable is their strength. Because they can do the preemptive moves that nobody would expect. To me, democracy is about predictability. Is about the possibility to understand your counterpart desires and create a win-win situation when you both benefit.
Yes.
And propose a solution that would work for your country and for the adversary country or your allied country. But that would move the humanity forward up to the very moment when we are one. And that's, I think, how the international policies should be created. But, we are facing all the time that nobody is capable of thinking of it, that people are just reacting on the events when they happen. So I think that, again, when we'll come to power in Russia for overwhelming majority of global political, it would be a total unexpected event to happen.
Yeah.
But I hope with our books, with our discussions, with our talks here, will make the situation a little bit more predictable, and this is good.
Yeah. So I'm going to let you go because you probably have to go and get ready for a press conference in about 30 minutes. I'm going to wrap up with a few things here. So thank you. It's great to see you again. I'm looking forward to seeing you in a half an hour. And we're going to figure out how to get you the link. Thank you,
Thank you, guys.
Ilya.